Good morning, students. Today I'll take chapter 3, Migration. First of all, let me explain what migration means. Migration is the movement of people from one place or country to another. Now, people have been moving from one place to another since the beginning of human evolution. And the reasons at that time were in search of food, for shelter, and for favorable weather. But nowadays, there are other reasons for which people move, like they want new jobs, they want better educational opportunities, or in case of a war, people are forced to move out of their country, or due to overpopulation. Now, migration could be permanent or temporary. There are various types of migration, and these types of migration are internal migration as well as external migration. Now, internal migration is when people move within the country from one place to another, and external when people move to a new country or to a new continent, that is external migration. And when a person leaves his or her country and moves to another, it is called emigration. Now, the person who emigrates is known as an emigrant from his or her own country. For example, when a person leaves India and goes to Canada, the person is said to have emigrated from India to Canada. And when a person arrives in a new country after leaving his or her own country, this is called immigration. This process is called immigration. And the person who has arrived in Canada from India is said to have immigrated to Canada. So, such a person who arrives in a new country is called an immigrant. I hope the difference between emigrant and immigrant is clear to you. Now, here in the book, they have shown a picture of some of the migrants who have moved from Mexico to USA. So, these migrants are emigrants in Mexico and they are immigrants in USA. Moving further, coming to the concept of temporary migration. Now, temporary migration is when people move temporarily or they move for a while. Now, this kind of migration could be annual. Annual means for an year. It could be seasonal, that is for a season, or they move daily. Now, people may move to lower regions from mountains during the harsh winters, especially the people who rear sheep. The people who rear sheep, they move from mountains to the valleys during the winter season so that the sheep can graze in the valleys. And during the summers, they move up to the mountains where the climate is cooler. Okay, so coming to the next concept now. Now we have some quick facts through which we will quickly go. That there are some people who have migrated because of the climatic change. Like many small islands in South Pacific Ocean, because of the climatic change, because of the global warming, they have submerged in water. And so people had to leave these islands and move to new areas. Okay, then I've already told you about the immigration of people to US from Mexico in that picture that was mentioned. And then moving further, another kind of migration is there where people move from rural areas to urban areas or urban areas to rural areas. And this kind of migration is based on the direction of movement. And it is of 4 types. The first type is rural to urban. The second type is rural to rural. The third type is urban to urban. And the fourth type is urban to rural. Then moving further on, first we study the migration called rural to urban migration. Now in this type of migration, the people migrate from rural areas to cities. And why do people migrate from rural areas to cities? For better job opportunities. This is the main reason why people migrate. That is for better job opportunities. In villages, jobs are either absent or very less. They're scarce. So the only way a person could get a job is by moving to a city. Now, he could either go alone or he could go with his family. Another reason is that there are better educational opportunities in the cities. Also, people are attracted by the urban lifestyle and the health services which are better in the cities. So this type of migration is common in the developing countries like Brazil and India. Then there could be a few other reasons for this type of migration, and these could be where villages cannot support a rapid increase in population. That means their resources are less and the population is increasing. So people have to migrate to cities. When there is reduced food supply, when there is shortage of land. So many people living in the villages, they are landless workers. So because of shortage of land, they have to move to cities to find alternative means of employment. Then introduction of mechanized farming could be a major reason. Because when mechanized farming is introduced, then the people are replaced by machines. So less human labor is required in the farms. So people become unemployed, and in order to seek employment, they move to the cities. Okay, moving on to the next type of migration, that is rural to rural migration, from one village to another village, from one rural area to another rural area. And what are the reasons? Why does this kind of migration occur? Now, there are many reasons. One could be acquisition of property in another village, to acquire property when there is a marriage. Okay, so for example, the girl belongs to another village, right? So when she gets married, she has to move to the village of her husband. Then also it could be due to the resources present in that village, they are better off. Then many people also leave their own villages and migrate to different villages where they buy land because that land is more fertile. Then there could be another type of migration, that is urban to urban migration, when people move from one city to another, and when people of one city choose to go to another city, that is urban to urban migration. And then they've given this important fact here, that the early human migration is believed to have started when Homo erectus first migrated out of Africa to Eurasia about 1.8 million years ago. So that was the first human migration took place. Moving on to the next page. So when people move from one city to another, so generally they move from a small city to a big city, to a large one, in search of better job opportunities, better educational facilities, better health facilities. For example, many students from Panchkula or from Chandigarh, they move to Delhi in search of better colleges. Many people who are suffering from all kinds of ailments, they go to Delhi to get their treatment done in the best of hospitals, like people go to AIIMS. Then many students and professionals from cities like Patna and Allahabad, they move to Delhi in search of better opportunities. And this type of migration also happens when population of a city becomes too big and begins to affect the quality of life. Like many people from Delhi, they have shifted to satellite towns, like people from Delhi, because Delhi, there is a lot of pollution. So people have migrated from Delhi to places like Gurgaon and Noida, where pollution is less, and also all the amenities which are found in Delhi are also found in these cities. So people, and also living there is cheaper than living in Delhi, because Delhi rents are exorbitant, they're very high. So people cannot afford such high rent, so they move to Gurgaon or they move to Noida, because there it is cheaper, living is cheaper compared to Delhi. Rents are not that high. Then also migration can occur when large government offices are moved from one city to another. Like this is what happened in case of Panchkula. Many offices of the Haryana government have been shifted from Chandigarh to Panchkula, and so many people have moved from Chandigarh to Panchkula because their offices have been shifted. Government offices have been shifted. Okay, then moving on to urban to rural migration. Now, in this type of migration, people go back to their villages for several reasons. Okay, very recently we witnessed this kind of migration. Now, what was the reason for this kind of migration? Though this was a temporary migration. Now, the reason was that due to the corona pandemic, there were not many jobs available. People had suddenly become unemployed because the factories were shut, the businesses were shut, and so people did not have enough to eat. So what did they do? They decided, the migrants, the laborers, they decided to go back to their villages. Okay, so this was a migration from urban areas to rural areas, but again this was temporary. Then people generally move from urban areas to rural areas to look after the property. Now, if you have some land in the in your village, so, and if after your parents, who's going to take care of the land? Your parents will be taking care of the land. And once they die, so it is the children who are going to look after the property. So most of the people, they move back to villages to take care of the property which is left behind by their parents, or to marry a boy or girl. Then some people also return when they find that there are not many suitable jobs. There are not many suitable jobs in the city. So they move back. And sometimes when they're unable to find proper shelter in the cities, so that is also time when they move back. And sometimes they feel that they're not able to afford living in the city. The cost of living in the city is very high. So people move back to the villages. Or the migrants are unable to cope up with the traffic and pollution. The life in city, the quality of life in city is really bad. There is so much of traffic and there's so much of pollution. People are unable to cope up, so they go back to their villages. Now, this kind of urban to rural migration is very popular. It's very common in countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan. Then there are other kinds of migration besides the ones which are mentioned here. And these types are primitive migration, then forced migration, then there is free migration, forced and free. Forced is when the people are forced to move, okay, under some pressure they're moving. And free migration when they're moving at their own will, voluntarily they're moving. Then there is illegal migration also. So let us study these different types of migration one by one. Beginning with primitive migration. Now, primitive migration is one in which people respond to an unfavorable environment by leaving it for more favorable one. The pre-industrial societies tend to make such decisions. Okay, so there could be a number of reasons why primitive migration occurs. Now, these primitive migrations occur because of the following reasons. Now, let's just have a look at it. So, generally, these migrations occur on a group basis. The entire group, the entire tribe moves in this case, rather than one individual. And generally, the hunting and the gathering groups, which still exist in the world, especially in the tribal areas and in the underdeveloped areas, they migrate regularly when the resources of the area get depleted. Resources get depleted. What does that mean? When the resources are exhausted, they're completely finished, they're completely utilized. So people move from that area. Some farming communities, they move when the land becomes infertile. Now, this kind of cultivation is called shifting cultivation, where farmers, they cultivate a piece of land, okay, and they do not use any modern means of fertilizers or irrigation. They completely rely on rainfall, and they cultivate the land for 2 to 3 years, and when the land becomes infertile, they just leave it, they abandon it. Then they look for another patch of land, cut the another patch of land, and they cut the trees and the vegetation there, burn the land, and then they cultivate that land for some time. Okay, so this is called shifting cultivation, and here people are migrating from one place to another. Then also primitive migration occurs when additional land is needed in case the population increases, the size increases, and the land is too small for that population. So then the people, they migrate to another land which is bigger in size to fulfill all the needs of their tribe. Moving on to the next type, that is forced migration. Now, forced migration, as the name suggests, it occurs when people living in an area, they are forced to leave the place due to reasons like poor living conditions. It could be due to persecution, when people are being punished or they're cruelly treated. In case of lack of political freedom, in case of lack of political freedom also people move. Then when there is lack of means of earning livelihood, in case there is a famine, all these types of migration, they're called forced migration, when people are forced to move out of the place where they live. And forced migration is involuntary. That means people do not move out of their free will. They're forced to move out because the conditions become adverse. Next type of migration is free migration. So free migration occurs when people have a choice. People have a choice. So they move to a new place out of their own will. It's a voluntary kind of migration. So they have a choice to either stay or move. The decision to move is based on people's personal choice, and it is mostly guided by factors like better job opportunities, better living conditions, and these people often analyze the advantages and disadvantages of moving to a new place, and then they make an informed decision. So this is about free migration. Moving on to the next topic, that is illegal migration. Now people, they migrate where when they violate immigration laws. Okay, when people migrate by violating immigration laws, that is without the consent of the government of that country, they move to other countries. And it is the crossing of a country's border by a person or a group of persons by violating the immigration laws of the destination country. So they migrate, and they migrate against or they violate the laws of the destination country, and that is called illegal migration. In such cases, migration becomes illegal.